a good one. Yeah. Yeah, you get raggy. I on? Uh-huh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here with nobody.
Yes.
Bring it over here, please. With nobody, Ed Fields.
Yeah, that's right. Nobody
because listen, nobody has the pizza. And people, and bodies don't get it.
Can I ever tell you how much I love you? It look good, Candy?
That look good, eh?
Mm.
Oh. For your daddy.
Ah, good.
And so he's just going to let that.
What the hell? Is that a Negro spiritual?
That's a pizza spiritual.
Okay.
Let me go for a slice, babe.
Anyway, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. And Candy's also here, and Ken.
I can't smell
And I'm about to eat. Let me see here.
We're about to eat.
I'm about to eat.
Let me see how it looks.
14 pieces of pizza.
Oh my God.
And give out 2.
Kendrick?
Mm-hmm. 2 piece. You know?
If you sit here and eat 14 pieces, you got a problem.
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do.
I just have a lot of pizza.
No, that's
so
the
anyway.
height of gluttony.
So anyway, how are things? What's happening? This has to cool down a little bit.
Why?
No, you don't let the pizza. That smells so
hot.
good. Barbecue chicken on that, eh?
You know when it's so hot, you have to
Yeah,
go like.
yeah. Anyway, I hope you burn your tongue.
Barbecue chicken on that.
Anyway,
Look,
going back
Candy.
to the show, how are you all doing?
I don't see any.
I'm.
You're doing okay?
I
You had a cold. You're getting
I'm
a
healing
cold.
up now.
Got a cold.
I see sausage.
Yeah.
Yeah, how you getting over that?
I still got a ways to go, but the voice is coming back.
Yeah,
so.
go in to see. Ken told you. You wouldn't take it from me.
I
Go
think
with Ken.
someone else told me that, but I was afraid to go in the ocean because I didn't want to get my mole wet, as Bateman say.
Let me tell you how silly that
Make
is.
it worse.
So on another day, the non-nasty people shower. They're not getting colds carte en masse.
I'm not wetting my head when I go in the shower, though. I put on a shower cap. That's
Yeah,
the
well,
difference.
okay. Well, you know what? That's good.
That's the difference.
Yeah. Well, Ken and I don't put on shower caps.
Y'all ain't got no hair.
But the point is, we're not getting a cold. That's the point. It has nothing to do with hair.
You get
We're dealing with not the hair thing. We're
that's
dealing
why
with getting
I'm
the
wearing
cold.
a
I know why
shower
you're
cap.
wearing it, but I'm saying that you stated that you didn't want to get your head wet in the sea, because it doesn't matter whether you have hair or not if your head wet.
Well, it matters if the water is cold, and that's what it is. And in the ocean too, it's not like you're putting on hot water on your head. I don't want that.
How
cold
does it
water.
sound like when you're just inventing stuff as you go?
But I think it's,
No.
if you get your head wet or whatever, and it remains wet into, after you've already come out of the water and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't think the actual getting your head wet is what.
Wet?
Right? Yeah, like if you. You know what I mean? Like if you wash your hair and you go into the AC for the rest of the night and don't dry it or
People do
something
that?
like that. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know. You know
People
what I
don't
mean?
dry their hair or head. They just
Some
stay wet.
people let it air dry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, man.
Okay, well, those are obviously the people who have colds.
Or I don't know. I'm just trying to help Rogan out.
We refer to them as the cold people.
I just trying to. I mean, I wet my hair
But you
every day.
wet your hair when you're in the shower, and you don't take cold showers, right? You taking a hot
Oh
shower.
no, cold showers. Who does that?
Exactly. So I ain't going in the
No,
ocean.
well, the ocean isn't cold. Number one,
Yes, it is.
it's sweltering heat out there.
No,
Next
it
thing
is
is
cold.
It's warm.
the other. It is warm, and the other thing is that I heard from a doctor once who told me. He really said that's all garbage. She says the only thing you really have to worry about is, if you have a low immune system, like you're tired and all that, and
Right.
you have sudden changes in temperature. And I don't even know if that's true. But that was the only concern that he was talking about. Anyway, you can't get a cold from getting your head wet. Dolphins, they're mammals. They don't get
What,
colds.
you ever talk to a dolphin?
Yes,
They
I
ever tell
have.
you when they
I
have
have.
sore throat?
As you know,
Wait, when?
dolphins can even see themselves in
Yeah,
the
they
mirror.
can see themselves, and I'm sure you've spoken to some who told you they had a sore throat. So you don't know when you're sick.
And then you hear another one go, ah! So you know. That's how
Can
we
you send
do.
my pizza, please?
I'm not sending. You can't send pizza.
What do you do?
We're going to have pizza in the break.
No, why?
Boy,
Because it would be proper and delicious.
Yeah, you were sitting here chewing down on Candy's
CNR.
curry chicken the other
CNR
day on
is
the
different
air.
from P and Z. I'd like to find out what else is going on in your life, Rogan Smith. Are you taking anything? Like a Theraflu?
I'm taking Dayquil,
Dayquil.
and I'm taking the vitamin C packs.
Do you take the NyQuil?
No.
Why, you don't want to be knocked out, eh?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I like to be alert in case someone breaks into my home.
That's a good way to think about things. So you don't sleep then?
Listen, you gotta love Rogie.
I'm super paranoid.
She's nuts.
Girl, I have my knife in my room.
Yeah.
Oh my
She's a cracker.
goodness.
She is what we would call in the good old days a crackle doodle doo. Okay? Okay? A late? No, man, you know what you do? You get your NyQuil, and then you do a little shot with that because it says do not take alcohol with it. But you do just so you can get a little. So you wake up. You wake up with no cold. Okay. Yeah. It's all good. Candy, you had a decent weekend? You're texting?
Yeah,
You're
man.
talking to people?
Sorry, I had a good busy weekend.
Uh-huh. I was away. I'm not going to say where I was, but you know, when I came back to the airport is so lovely now. I just, you know, it's a nice experience, and everyone was out on the beach, and there was not a lot of traffic, and I thought, you know, what a nice place. But the thing is, you know, we just gotta appreciate what we have, hey,
Yeah.
compared to other places, and I don't think we do, and I don't think we realize how much we can maximize it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're content with the status quo, and we've got to get out of that mode. Of course, the big Bipple had its experiences on the weekend, and there's no, I mean, you know, I'll spend 5 minutes on it. The reality is people are at their zenith of tolerance, and so there's nothing that's going to be said or not said. The only thing that's going to be said is it's fixed.
Right.
That's the only thing people want to hear at this stage. So hopefully, did you hear the BPL announcement?
No,
They gave it you know, they obviously apologized, and hopefully in the next 2 to 3 months, the one thing you could say this time around, you actually know that the generators was on island,
Right.
because it would block up traffic for like.
Exactly.
Well, you didn't have to deal with that, right?
No, but I heard about it.
Yeah. Did you have to deal with that, Rogan? Because, you know, 146 wheels on one trailer, 1.5 miles an hour.
Man, listen.
Don't drop none of them.
I was so exhausted. This was a nightmare weekend. A nightmare weekend.
Yeah, because
In
you have the
terms
cold
of
and
what-
everything.
because
It's-
you felt bad.
Yeah.
My cold? I'm talking about in terms of my cold and the fact that the light was going off
Oh,
every
yeah,
minute. It's
so
like
you uncomfortable.
I literally had to go out and purchase surge
Fan?
protectors.
Oh, yeah, you
and,
have to get a surge
and
protector
what do you
in
call
this
it? The battery operated fans and stuff like that. Spending money what I don't need to be spending, man.
You were affected?
Because
I was away.
Oh,
so,
you were away.
yeah.
Ken, you were
it's
affected too?
ridiculous.
No.
But the thing is, you know, listen, it is what it is, and you just
I can
hope.
still vent. It
No.
is what it is. I can still vent.
I'm not. Why does
And
everyone
listen,
do that?
and
I'm
this-
not saying you can't vent. I'm just commenting. It's just another comment. I would be extremely annoyed, and you have to be annoyed because it's inconvenient. It's
3 to 4
uncomfortable.
hours every day.
You know?
It's like I don't set my clocks around the house anymore.
Right.
And
mine stay blinking.
And I'm fearful that my stuff, you know, before I got the surge protectors and stuff, I have a surge protector for my washer and dryer.
Yeah.
But it's like my computer, if I lose that, I lose so much stuff. It's like I'm just plugging up so much things in these
You know
surge
how I know the
protectors and it
power
ain't
supply. You know how I know the power supply is so tricky. If I go away, I have one of those
Aren't
boxes.
you eating?
I have one of. Yes, I'm eating.
He's eating.
I'm testing it to make sure it's not poison.
Oh,
Can you send me a slice, please?
Send us a slice.
Because you're eating it anyway.
But it's not poison, so you're good. Listen, you know those little boxes that you plug the chargers into? So it's like a plug, then it has like 3 or 4
Right.
thing. Well, and then it has a blue light.
The power cord or
It's like a box.
Right.
It's a power cord, and you plug the USB cables into it,
Yeah.
and then you plug it into your. But it has a little blue light. Well, I have to constantly push the button to turn on the blue light because you're getting these power surges
Right.
that
And
turn it
it's
off. When I'm in the States, the blue light never go off.
no.
You know, because of these dips and all that.
Mhm.
She's having a little issue over there. Did you got your pizza?
No, I don't. Oh,
No, her.
Her. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can take out more than one. Don't be. Ask
No,
Asia
later.
if she wants a pizza. Does she like pizza? Is she allowed to have pizza? Yeah, check it out. So, we averted an Iranian attack. No? My boy, the big Don, say he decided 10 minutes before just to hold off.
He's so silly.
This is what I want to know.
That's a crazy temperament he got.
This is what I want to know. They knocked down a drone, right?
They shot it down, said it was in their airspace.
Well, and the U.S. is saying it was an international. Well, it was. Where was it?
I still don't know.
It wasn't in two spaces.
I believe it was in their airspace for real.
Of course.
To be honest with you.
Because I don't think Iran would try to fool with that.
And those drones cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Like
131.
Jesus. I think I saw a quote for 200 something million. So I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. No.
You in the market?
In a newspaper article.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. I thought you meant like you was looking to buy a drone. Like, okay, I got a couple of quotes.
That's hilarious.
Quote in an article saying they could be like 200 something million dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, I buy a drone.
Look like you were ready to buy a couple of drones. So, yeah. So the world is in turmoil, So my advice to people, I don't have much of it. By the way, before I get into my advice, I understand your boy, Javi, gone.
Who's that?
Javi. Steve Harvey, yeah.
My uncle.
Your boy.
I love him so much. Gone from what? The talk show? Yeah. Yeah, he knew that. He announced it a long time. They're replacing his show with Kelly Clarkson's show.
Why they cut a show?
I don't know.
I understand it's something to do with some domestic issues. But what I heard.
That's what I believe that they said because, anyway, we got to go to break. We can talk about it when we come back.
Because what I'm about to tell you, you're only around me anyway. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. And half of the time we've been spending devouring pizza because, unfortunately, today we did not get any CNR. So,
I knew somebody was going to bring that
or
up.
as we call it, CNWR. You know what I mean? Yeah, because we don't want to confuse your rice with anything else. Listen, we don't have an expectation.
No, I know that.
But we are going to make jokes.
I know that.
So, there you have it. But, of course, we did call.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
Ah, Lord.
Mm-hmm. Well, you never know. You don't want. I don't want double up on the foods.
No, agreed.
That
was lack of preparation.
By the way, Rogan,
behalf.
check it out, make sure because we was checking out to get something else.
Huh?
We were thinking of getting something else, but then.
I say today's Monday.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what she said.
Check for curry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you saying, but Steve?
No, I just said that he is apparently one of the raps is that when the show ended.
His daytime talk show.
His daytime talk show.
Where am I living? When
well,
did
you
that
don't watch
happen?
that show. I mean, do you watch his show?
Do you
watch his show? How would you know it ended if you don't watch it?
I watched clips with people, who've been,
but apparently he
interviewed by
didn't.
him.
Apparently he did not even say anything to his staff. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. But
so
apparently
it was canceled, or he just wanted to stop it?
It was canceled.
It was canceled. But apparently, normally when that happens, you call your staff and you say thanks for doing a good job or whatever. Whatever. But he just kind of said nothing.
I don't understand. I don't believe that because first of all, there was talk about that show ending from January.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the network didn't confirm it to Steve Harvey, right? He's just been hearing little rumors. And then it came out that Kelly Clarkson's show, her upcoming show, would be replacing Steve's show. Mm-hmm. And he addressed it on his radio talk show saying, you'd think that after so many years in a company that they would at least give you some notice about boom, boom, boom. Yeah. But he found out, the people found out, okay? And then he had a final show. I think T.D. Jakes came on his show, and then he had a final farewell. So I don't understand how they could say, the staff could say they didn't know.
Right.
No, they didn't say he didn't know. What they said is he didn't say anything to them. In other words, they expect.
He didn't know because
January, that's not the point I'm making.
After they found out,
what I'm saying is after the show was found out, he didn't say anything to them like, "Thank you guys for being, part of the show."
But he did that in the final episode.
Okay, so that's what happened there. So anyway, I'm just telling you what the people. I don't follow this stuff.
Exactly.
I just if you go on the internet, you'll hear what they say. They said that people were pissed off because he didn't even pick up the phone to say thank you to anyone who did the show. Now, if he wants to be on the show in his final show and say, this is our final show and everyone has that's different from showing people, some gratitude who would have produced your show or whatever.
I don't know it in this case, but I do know that was the case for his radio show when he was moving from Chicago, I guess, to L.A. or whatever.
He didn't thank them?
He didn't notify. He took the people who he wanted to take with him to the show to LA, and the rest were left by the wayside. But you also have to understand too, Steve Harvey had a lot of people who were leaking information from his show in the public domain and embarrassing things in the public. And so I can't blame him for saying, you know what, these little troublemakers, I can't move with them, and I ain't tell them nothing. I move in silence. See ya. Thanks for the memories and bye.
So just out of question,
Leaking stuff like what? I mean,
just out of question. How did you come up with that theory versus? And I'm not saying it's not a right theory.
That's not my theory. That's what was reported.
But this is what's also. I'm just saying, how is your this is a question? How is what was reported, that theory, more accurate? I'm not saying it isn't than the other theory that was reported.
No, I'm not saying it isn't. I said in this instance, I don't understand how people. Listen to what I'm saying. For the TV talk show, there were rumors floating from January 2019 about the fact that Steve was going to get canceled. Steve didn't believe it. A lot of people were saying it was just rumors. Then the network, those confirmed that Kelly Clarkson's show was taking over. That's what I'm saying. That's totally different from Steve knowing that because he's doing his daytime talk show, he's going to have to move his radio show from Chicago to wherever to LA. And so in this instance for the TV, everybody would have already been apprised of what was transpiring because the rumors were already out versus his intentional and deliberate move from Chicago with the radio talk show to LA. Now, in that instance, I still give him wrong because to me, even if the people weren't nice to me or whatever, I'd still tell them, hey, guys, I'm moving the show. I'm taking who I want to take with me. Boom, boom, boom. That's what I'm saying to you. That's not to say that in your instance it ain't plausible. What I'm saying is I heard those rumors with the radio show and not the TV show.
Yeah. I haven't really followed it to that extent. So I guess I'm not qualified to speak to it in any kind of qualified way other than obviously there were people who thought they had a working relationship with him who seemed perturbed that he hadn't reached out to them.
I think y'all are talking about two different things.
Well, I'm just talking about this TV show.
I know. I mean, I'm saying Rogan is
which
saying,
we shouldn't even really care about.
What's that? I know. Like, this your boy, right?
I love Steve
Yeah,
Harvey.
she's been on the
I
show.
love Steve.
That's why she should disclose that she loves Steve Harvey.
But I did disclose that. Well, we were
No.
off the air when I said that to you. But I said that on the show.
No, I'm saying I think Ed is saying
respect him.
even after all of that towards the end of the show, he didn't do anything, and not publicly, but in
exactly.
have something for his staff.
If this show ends, right? No matter what the circumstances are, right?
Right.
Excuse me.
I'm going to reach out to Rogan. I'm going to reach out to Ken. I'm going to reach out to you.
Right.
And I'm going to say, listen, guys, I really want to thank you. Not on the air.
Right. It's
but
not a
together.
public
Okay,
thing,
even
but,
if it's an
behind.
email.
What if I were leaking information about you to the tabloids, to the
Well,
rags?
maybe I wouldn't. But is everyone doing that? I don't know. That isn't the point. I wouldn't. I'm just saying that it's the point. The point that is making.
He's the leader. He's
and the point
he's
that I'm
the
making is
person
not
with the
everyone
show.
did that, and he contacted no one.
Right.
So the point I'm saying is, if you did it, maybe I wouldn't reach out to you, but I certainly would reach out to Ken and to Candy. Okay. So that's the point.
So maybe he reached out to some people.
But
who
they
worked
said
at
no
the
one. He reached out to no one.
I don't
That's
believe
what they
that.
said.
Were you at that?
And it sounds like the people that probably were not involved in this whole thing were probably hurt
They're just hurt. Yeah.
That's
by
what I
that.
think.
Well,
Well, but they have
exactly. They have a right to be
They
hurt.
have the right to be.
Who?
The
The
persons
people who
who
were
worked
not
hard
involved
on
in the
his show
leaking.
that were not involved in the leaking of stuff.
No, I never done. I never
Now,
done.
Rogana, you being too biased.
So in other words, someone who is let's
I'm
say.
a very impartial person.
So listen, the person who is say the cameraman.
you and being that today, though.
Yeah, the person who's the cameraman, right? Who didn't do any leaking. They shouldn't feel hurt that Steve Harvey didn't say thank you for all those years of being my cameraman.
See this thing what you're talking about? This is 2017. That's why I'm asking you where you seeing this. That's why I kept bringing up the radio show, Candy.
Okay.
Where are you seeing this thing
I'll have to
about?
look it up again.
It says Steve Harvey doesn't apologize for letter telling stuff. You talking about this thing from his memo leak?
I'll have to look.
This thing is from 2017. That was related to his radio show.
Okay.
Anyway.
So what else is going on other than Steve Harvey? I'm Steve Harvey'd out now.
Boy, I love Steve.
Okay.
When
I turned, like my whole, like the old people say, my spirit turned away from Steve.
Oh.
Was that same
This is
interview
May
with,
2019, by the way, that
Monique?
I'm looking at.
Monique, and not because
What?
I like Monique, not that at all. It's just some of the things that he was saying, and his whole aura and his whole energy, and
Tell me what you think about his energy.
He was only all about
I was
money.
100%
Exactly.
in agreement
That's
with
He's
Steve Harvey
only
on that.
about the money. He's like, integrity don't come before.
That's not true.
feeding your
That
That's
is
exactly
not
what he
true.
said.
That is not true. He was saying to Monique is a woman who got on the on a stage, okay? I told Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and Lee Daniels to, I can't even say what she said. She was referring to male anatomy. suck her male anatomy. Okay? That's what she said to 3 powerful black people in the industry. And what Steve Harvey was saying to her is that there are ways to settle disputes, and that ain't it. Going on the stage is not that's not it.
I'm not talking about that. He said some very he said some things about no, I remember the clip. I remember it, and I was like, why is Steve saying it like this?
No, that's what how people bastardize what he said later on, talking about, he's putting money over integrity, and that's not what he was saying. He was saying, I have to be careful, especially as a black man in America working. You have to be very careful on how you move. And there are certain things I can't get out in public and say, especially in that tenor, because I have a family to feed.
He didn't do a good job at.
Can I, if you don't mind me saying something?
He didn't do a good job at communicating that.
I have a personal relationship with Steve Harvey. I'm not talking about we're friends.
Right.
When I first opened up Joker's Wild Comedy Club, Steve Harvey was one of the first comedians that we hired. He came here twice, in fact. In those days, he was making, I'll divulge it, like around about $1,200 a week, doing 6 shows, okay? And he always knew, and I always knew, and everyone who heard him always knew he was going to be big because he was very funny guy, very smart, very witty. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, on more than one occasions in the discussions I've had with him, and I'm not going to waste my time debating it because I had the direct discussion, he is all about the money. There's no, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm. He's dealing with you in a business capacity.
No, I'm not talking about me. I'm not talking about all the money for me. We didn't have an issue. I'm talking about the discussions we had that he and I had about the house outlook. Right. Not about me paying him. He got his money from me. That's not a problem. Rogan, it's not fair. You see, now the one thing, because you're doing this.
I'm doing it.
Okay, but you were doing that. Okay, all right. But she love up Steve.
I don't know if you're allowed to say that or the.
No, you can say that, yeah. But here's the thing, okay? I'm saying to you that you're allowed to be as entrepreneurial as you want, right? Mm-hmm. But, you brought that point up, and I'm glad you did, okay? Because the reality is, we'll be right with you, Marla. The reality is, okay, in the discussions I had with him, his statements always was about, well, I can get mine and I can do that. That's fine. But you know when the person has that, you know when a person is entrepreneurial as opposed to when a person is just, that's the deal. So.
I just didn't like how he said, his integrity don't come before the people that he has to feed or something like that. I can pull up the clip. I can pull it up.
And the other thing, and I'm sure I'll get riled for this too. The other thing I always found funny was person like Steve, Mr. Harvey, giving marriage counseling, after 3 marriages. Wonderful. That's just my opinion.
Well, he has a lot of experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, to the point about the money, if I'm talking to somebody who I don't know, I don't expect him to get personal with you on his outlook on life and his religion or whatever. And I think it's unfair to just focus on that one singular moment that you may have had with him. Did you have months and months of interaction with this man?
I had several weeks of interaction with this man.
And he's all about the money.
I'm just telling you my opinion of what he was. Let me ask you this question. When you talk to someone for an hour, 2 hours, 2 weeks, do you not form an opinion? Just an opinion?
Sure.
Right. So whether I'm right or wrong, I formed an opinion. It just happened to coincide with Candy's opinion from saying something that may not have been the same thing. You may have a particular grounds that you said about how she behaved, but I'm just saying it coincided. And I will make you a bet that if you talk to, and now you're going to get dead mad at this, to 10 people.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah, I won't do that.
Don't do that.
10, okay.
Because that's going to make me get upset.
Okay.
Because don't project.
Okay, 10 people. If you talk to 10 people who didn't go on the show and have a good time with him, they will say 9 or 10 will have the same impression of him because they've enunciated to me on many occasions. He just had a function here a couple of years ago. Disaster. So I've had many of exchange with Mr. Harvey, and all of them have. One time, for instance, I'll give you a real close example. I'd known this guy for about 5 years. Okay, and I went up to him and said, "Hey man, how you doing?" It was at Cafe Martinique. Yeah.
Who is this?
Steve Harvey. So it's just
maybe he felt your aura and that you were judgmental of him, and so maybe that's why.
Hey man, how you doing?
Lord, maybe that's
this I'm partial stuff
today. Hold on.
You're correct.
People will come up to. If I know somebody who does not like me, bad mouths me, whatever, and they come up to me. Listen.
But I've never badmouthed them.
Listen, I'm just I'm trying to make the point here.
Okay.
About even the most simple things. You'll be like, hey, how you doing? And keep it moving because you just don't like their vibe, you don't like their aura, whatever. That's all I'm saying to you.
Okay. Well, listen, our guest this afternoon is going to be Marlon Johnson, who is the Financial Secretary of the Bahamas. And we're going to talk about the budget of the Bahamas. And we're going to talk to Candy before that.
Stuff.
Yes, exciting stuff. We're going to talk about Candy before that. So how much time we got left before the news? 2 minutes. So, Candy, why don't you introduce what you want to talk about this evening?
Well, it's so funny, and I can't believe none of you have even watched it yet, but I can't even talk about it. I wanted to ask if you all had watched, the Netflix miniseries, When They See Us. And the only reason why, because I watched it about a week or two ago, but then this weekend I was watching another documentary by Ava DuVernay, 13th. Which is more of, interviewing, different politicians and activists and things like that on, the 13th Amendment in the United States and the whole mass imprisonment. And man, that documentary is just,
especially for like things like marijuana
holy
and stuff.
Smokes. Like you have to just, watch that for the breakdown of how things just deteriorate, changed from. It's just a different system. You went from slavery to literally setting up a different system of slavery. So, but yeah, When They See Us, y'all have to watch it. I know a lot of people don't want to or have their reservations about watching it because they don't want to invite that type of sort of like that energy, because Ava DuVernay does a hell of a job at evoking that emotion. So. We got to go to.
We got to take a break and then we'll come back
so.
and we'll talk about it some more.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back. They got a standing O, by the way, at the BET Awards.
Man, this is something else.
I didn't see it, but I heard it was a good awards program.
I don't watch them.
Guess what? I don't watch it either.
We're on still?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
So I just got to tell you what was so good about it.
We got to take a break and we'll come back.
I heard about it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith, and our guest this afternoon is going to be Marlon Johnson, the Financial Secretary of the Bahamas, who, this year was a pretty quiet year with regard to the budget. And, compared to last year when there was like a major uproar because of the increase of VAT, et cetera. But more of a note, and I didn't know this young man, although I used to see him. I don't know if you knew him, Rogan. MDs.
Yeah.
I never, have you met him?
No.
Because I never met him, but I used to see him all the time.
Right.
Because he always had those dreadlocks. And I was away and I had only heard about this car accident. And it was weird because on Thursday of last week, I wasn't paying attention. And I was coming out of the road, where Comfort Suites is. And I was turning on to go up to Coral Towers. And I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't on the phone or anything, but I just wasn't. And there was a scooter. And there was a young man on the scooter. He was a Rastafarian. I shouldn't say he was a Rastafarian. He had dreadlocks. And I almost hit him. And he was coming at me aggressively, right? And all I said to him is, sir, I'm very sorry. I just wasn't paying attention. And then he kind of simmered out and walked away. And then I heard about this case, and I said, what is it? How do you, what causes something like that to happen? Because I don't know the details.
So I'm hearing conflicting reports, so I'm not even sure exactly which one is correct.
It was an accident on Prince Charles, right?
It was an accident, but then
they
you
said
heard
that this incident
completely
happened
unrelated.
Before, yeah. Because there was an eyewitness account that said they don't know what these people are reporting. There was a confrontation between MDs and this man. Yeah. And that happened either before or after the accident. So they were totally unrelated. So I don't understand. I still don't know.
And MDs is a spiritual singer, right?
No,
that's
it's like a reggae.
Yeah,
reggae.
Very talented.
Okay.
Incredibly talented.
Very talented guy.
So it's kind of.
And it wasn't, and I think, and there was another story that he wasn't stabbed.
He wasn't stabbed. Repeatedly, they said eyewitness said he was
like
cut.
A quote unquote cut.
A fatal cut.
Yeah, because apparently, according to the thing, that he drove off.
And he tried to drive himself to the hospital.
Yeah.
I think, and didn't.
It's it's senseless, right? I mean, all of the killing, any kind of killing is senseless.
Yeah.
But whatever transpired, because these people, it appears, and I don't know, didn't even know each other. I don't know that.
That's not what I heard.
They knew each other?
I think so, yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
think
Well,
so.
I mean, that's the thing.
Knew each other, not like, they boys or anything like that.
But they maybe had some history or something
or
like
had
that.
some, business transaction going on.
So was there even a car accident?
There was a car accident, but it was completely
involving those two?
No.
Oh.
No,
okay.
not even. It had nothing to do with them.
Oh, well, that's a big.
Assuming that is the correct.
The eyewitness account, yeah.
Right.
So no one really knows the correct story at this moment.
Not at this moment.
Yeah, okay, well.
But I mean,
anyway.
our deepest sympathies to his family.
Yeah.
Because
that's crazy.
That's a loss to the entertainment community as well.
Yeah,
a lot of people
big
seem
one.
to love him.
And I understand that there's someone assisting the police, so they might have someone who's responsible.
I always wondered about that. Like, when
assisting? You mean you on the
You can't say anything until you're charged.
No, I know. No, I'm saying like when these incidents happen and things like that, and people are either taking videos or sending voice notes and things like that. How do they then? I mean, the police then go after go seek them to say, okay, well, you the one who's sending out all these voice notes.
Or they might send it to the police.
Yeah.
They might. I mean, people might just. send it to the police. They have hotlines.
Because then you know what I mean. You automatically put yourself into the into the situation.
They have a thing called Crime Stoppers. So if you have a video, you can easily send.
Yeah, that's different. That's different from contacting the police directly and dealing with all of that.
I mean,
but then when you don't.
Online?
What's that?
You mean as opposed to putting it online?
Right. Like, yes, you haven't. Yes. So your first step is to send it to your friend, and your friend send it to all over the place instead of going straight to the police.
I think in the world of social media, that's their first step for cakes and crime. It doesn't matter to them. Whatever is out there, people stripping, people whatever, that's their thing.
But what I'm saying is, if you don't want to be involved in such an incident like that, some people don't want to. I don't want to testify, or I don't want to be a witness. I don't want to be this or that. Don't send voice notes.
They're not people. It's very evident that people who post. No, let me take that back. Many people who post these things are not thinking. It's like when you go online and post you having sex. You're not thinking about the the ramifications.
And I'm not saying that people should not help and be witnesses and help people out, but
Post what? What is that? Well, you can say it. Post what?
The pastor.
He handed up 1 second.
No, the pastor voice note.
Okay,
pastor voice note. Have you heard about that?
No, I didn't hear about that.
Oh goodness.
Yeah.
We
can talk about it after.
Yeah.
All right. So
anyway, but go watch. I'm surprised you have not seen it.
No, I've seen the promos. It's on Netflix.
Well, go watch it and then we could have a conversation about it.
I haven't felt. I got to be in a mindset.
I get it. No, you do.
Yeah.
You do.
Like I can't be like just finish watching a comedy and then turn that on.
No, but Rogan, you said you haven't watched it. But if you don't want to watch that just yet, I mean, I would first watch 13th.
I've seen that.
Oh, you have? Have you?
It's It's an hour long.
Yeah, it's filled with a lot of information.
Yeah.
But that's all I got today, y'all.
All right. Well, listen, Candy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope y'all have a great rest of the show.
We shall.
Talking about the budget.
Yes.
What happened?
No, I was going to say you should stay right there.
Leaving
we'll see you,
Rogie.
Candy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. And our special guest, but I don't know, is Marlon Johnson, who is, of course, the Financial Secretary of the Bahamas. And we're going to talk about the budget. When was the budget communication last week?
No, the budget communication would have been the end of May.
The
final.
They were debating.
The debate just wound up in the House of Assembly
last
week in the Senate now.
It seems far away.
Yeah.
And compared to last year,
a lot more excitement last year.
Well, when you raise taxes, that's what you do. When you go from 7.5% to 5% to 12%, then you get that. Before we get into this year's budget, which almost seems mundane compared to the previous year, in your honest assessment, now people have different perspectives on things. What has been the impact of the 12%, not on the revenue, we'll get to that, but on people? I know you had the breadbasket items, which in theory, the poor would have been least impacted.
Right.
You had removal of duties on clothing, which in theory, even though the VAT wasn't moved, the reduction of duty should have, you had things like in the middle class sector, like reduction of duties on cars.
Right.
That type of thing. So, but people are saying, look, this increase of, I can't, it's hurting me.
Right. Well, certainly, I think we don't know it at a detailed level. One of the things we are going to study this fiscal year in a much more granular way is the impact of various taxes on various demographics. Because as you rightly point out, how it impacts people on the bottom tier is different every quintile you get. The working assumption is that it impacts the poorest people the worst. And sort of impressionistically that's true. But when you consider some of the elements that were removed, like water, the tax off of water, the VAT was removed totally off water, off of electricity, off of some of the bread basket items, the weight may not be as obvious as we think. So the working assumption would be that obviously the poor get hit hardest, and I think that's a fair assumption. But we really want to look at it in what we call quintiles, the bottom 20%, and do it up the ladder to see who really is paying the burden. Where does the burden of taxation fall? But that's at the sort of granular level. At the macro level, one of the interesting things that's come out from the study in looking at our GDP from the Department of Stats is that household consumption has increased. And that's a function of the fact that we have more employed people. Unemployment went up, but we still have, by again the Department of Statistics survey, we still have over 10,000 jobs created over the last 18 months, and we see the economy, and we see a lot more tourist activity. So, yeah, individual households, certainly people have felt the pinch, but writ large, certainly the GDP statistics borne out that consumption has actually increased by virtue of all of the economic activity.
In the attempt to balance or be equitable,
right,
between socioeconomic groups, and of course, I tend to think that logically the middle class get hit harder than the poorest support because you carve out stuff for people who listen. Let's be graphic. Sure. If you're making $12,000 a year,
right,
or worse, if you're making $0
dollars
a year, right, you're going to be buying basics, right. You're going to be buying food. Mm-hmm. You're going to have very small electricity bill.
Right.
You're going to have, you're not buying spa treatments and all these things, right? So your VAT bill should be $0,
right,
in theory.
Right.
But if you're in the middle class, and the people I think about most are the single mothers who have a very, lower to middle income, and any little dollar impacts them, right? Why is it not possible? If we think of that as a sales tax, to simply say, take sales tax, VAT, off of food and off of clothing.
Right. There's nothing to stop that. It's just what do you replace it with?
Right.
And so it's what do you do with the lost income? That's one way to do it. The other thing that...
Well, you increase the VAT.
Yeah, you may increase the VAT, but of course now that's a political discussion there because you're right, you may say, listen, we take this off and the vast majority of people will benefit, and you raise the VAT to 15% or 14%, and you cover that 2% covers the difference. But then it's the whole impression. So, but it is something, what we are getting in the habit, and we, in our infancy with this at the Ministry of Finance, is to do a lot of those scenario testing. We have in our sort of a fairly robust tax model, and so that's some of the things we're going to be looking at. What if you made these kinds of adjustments? Also, what other countries are experimenting with is how do you make transfer payments to people in a very direct way. So, for instance, if you have people in those lower socioeconomic groups, they may pay their VAT, but they may get a rebate. Or
that's another administrative.
Right. No, but you do it. This is on the assumption we're not going to do this on a paper base. This is us after we've already evolved the point where it's at point of sales and it's done automatically. Right. Oh, so okay. No, we ain't going to get into that where you got to submit this and get this form and no, it won't be that kind of deal. But the basic premise is that really we need to be a lot more robust in knowing how taxes impact specific groups, and then so that you could target it, because there are certain taxes you want to increase just to discourage certain behaviors. So biggie is like sugar tax. The working theory is that if you tax more on sugar, people's sugar consumption is going to come down. But again, if you do something like, you have to be able to know that that actually happens, that people just don't spend more on the sugar stuff and then forgo something healthy. So you need to be able to have these kind of to do these kind of in-depth analysis, because you do want to encourage certain kind of behaviors and discourage other ones.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, like let's say going out to eat,
right?
Okay, which is a luxury or a discretionary,
right?
Okay, that someone who's going to go out to eat and the bill is say $100 flat, right? And now it's what is it, $12?
Right, yeah.
Versus $115.
Right. Yeah,
I just, the $2 extra or $3 extra, if that person was going to spend $100.
Right.
Plus your 15% for your gratuity.
Well, yeah, but but you know what I'm saying. If to someone who is, let's say, well, first of all, if you're rich, that definitely ain't impacting you effectively, right? So you are then, like you said, doing these, because I think for the longest time, first of all, Bahamians didn't believe we paid taxes, but now we're in a true tax regime.
Right.
You are starting to get more analytical about how these impact different socioeconomic groups.
And to your point, I think when I said this even before I came back in government, one of the things that when the former administration introduced VAT, my working assumption is that this will now for the first time make Bahamians really sit up and pay attention to the fact that they pay a tax. And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, we certainly it's a pain for me in my role because of the questions you get asked. But as a citizen, I'm glad to see that people are sitting up and paying attention because they see that VAT on their receipt. And they feel in a very visceral way, where people just, even though they're being taxed before, and a lot of times they're being taxed more. They just didn't feel it because it was hidden.
So that's the question I want to ask. How is it that we miss that, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you'd asked a Bahamian who was off in college or something, so how do you all have taxes? No, we don't have taxes because they didn't have income tax or sales tax.
Right.
But when you had the days of where people were getting an average of around a 60% duty.
Yeah, duties were high. I mean, they were ridiculous.
How then can you not get the message across that let's use clothing.
Right.
If clothing now is zero duty,
right,
and the VAT is 12%,
right,
you're paying, instead of, let's say the duty was 40%,
right,
instead of paying 40% on clothing, you're now paying 12%.
Right.
How is that message not being transmitted?
Well, we've said the message over and over. We did some modeling around even groceries to show folks what the true impact of if you buy $100 worth of groceries, I think when we did the impact, the true impact was like 2%. Because we looked at the average mix of bread basket versus other items, and it was like 60% of your items fall in, 60% of the value of what you buy, not the items, fall into the bread basket item. So when you did out the math, the true increase on your food was only 2%. But you just can't people. You lay it out. People say, no, my bills went up by 5%. My cost of living went up by this 4.5%. You point out that electricity for the 60-70% of people, electricity bill is under $300 now, and so that's $30 a month you're saving on electricity. Right. That's a substantial amount. And so the true impact, it's the psychology of it is hard to overcome, Ed, because people. They're gonna fixate on the number. They're gonna fixate on the number.
There are still people who are trying to wrap their heads around that. What is the likelihood? Because every now and then we'll hear people pontificate about the fact that we could see income tax become a reality. Is that something that the administration has given some consideration to, and how would that work in a VAT environment? Would we remove VAT altogether, or what's the thought process there?
Well, the government has announced that no, they won't be giving any consideration to income tax in this term, for certainly in the term. Nor, let me be clear, because what I say will go in the newspapers tomorrow. Nor is there any consideration thereafter. So there's no consideration for income tax at this particular time. However, as has been pointed out locally, has been pointed out by international commentators, we do have to look at continuing the tax reform. We had the worst form of taxes. Those hidden taxes were brutal because, as Ed pointed out, they were high, they were hidden, and they were on a shrinking portion of our economy. As we got more affluent, it was only on goods. So if you were in the market for goods, or you're poor people who spend a higher proportion of their income on goods, it was really extraordinarily regressive. So, but we were comfortable. We loved the status quo. And so, the initial move to 7.5% meant a duty reduction on quite a number of goods, and then to 12% we saw that even compounded. But to the perception of the Bahamian is that their taxes has gone up tremendously. Second, one of the most difficult sells I have is to explain to Bahamians that even with the VAT, we are not a highly taxed country. And that's an impossible. That's a tough sell.
Because they just ain't used to. But
the point I'm making is that you could. I've had people who've gone. Not me, because if I do it, people assume I'm just being biased. But we've had independent commentators just go on and show people how we what our percentage of tax at GDP is. We pay like 18%. Is our ratio of tax at GDP, 18%. Other countries in the region is 24 to 25%. The developed countries is, with the exception of the U.S., which is around 26%, is 35, 40, 50% for some of the countries that everybody wants us to emulate.
Well, Rogan Smith wrote a column, what was that, 2 weeks ago?
Right.
About you don't like to pay.
Right.
And
last week.
Mm-hmm. And the thing would kind of resonates with me about that is this. It's kind of a telling tale with regard to our expectations.
Right.
And what we wish and prepared to pay for. So it's a kind of a cat and dog or spinning hamster wheel, right? We want certain standard things, but we don't want to pay for those things. We want electricity. We don't want to pay the electricity bill. We want. Rogan had a whole list of examples of what we don't want to pay for. We want good roads. Yeah. We don't want to pay for it. Now we say we don't want to pay for the roads because they ain't doing nothing with the money. But the money isn't there.
Right. Yeah, that's a proportion. I mean, we can take out, so the legitimate critique from this public is there isn't sufficient transparency and accountability for the funds. So I think that's a fair critique. So you see steps by the government to become more transparent, more reporting, improve that. So I think that's a fair critique. But even with that, even if the money were being accounted for fully, 18% of GDP tax collection constrains what you were able to do. Mm-hmm. And we have a capital deficit, infrastructure deficit of $2 billion. With our current regime, we only could raise $200 to $300 million a year in capital expenditure. And so we have first world expectations because we travel to the first world and we see all of these wonderful things. Mm-hmm. We hear the stories about, healthcare being taken care of, fantastic roads and public parks and all these things, and top class civil servants or civil service. But those things are expensive. The best of anything costs money. And so I think you're right. I think that's a really fundamental discussion we need to have as a people and say, what do we really want?
So, for instance, I'm just going to throw this last one. I don't know how you'll comment on it because you're always going to find yourself in a predicament here. Right. We have a very large public service. Right. In fact, it's the largest employer in the country, right? Who are, and I'm not certainly going to criticize them for this, asking for more revenue. Right. Why? Because the taxes are increasing and other things. However, the only way to get salaries for public servants, other than places that may have some user fee attached, right? Mm-hmm. Except in the case, and I think this was also pointed out in the case of the hospital, where what is it? 600 million or some
one collected.
700 million?
700 million.
Yeah, 700 million. So here's a situation where you have a user fee, but no one wants to pay. Right. Because if they did, then the nurses could get more money. Right. But the nurses themselves aren't going to want to pay more taxes. Of course. To pay them, which they would then have to take a percentage out of for taxes. The whole model seems to be kind of not formulated properly.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, again, that's my point. I think as a country, we have to give this some serious thought. We need to face into the narrative that if we want a low tax regime, then we have to be very modest in our expectations. Or, to your point, we then move to a user fee model. I was in Singapore and I marvel. Anybody's been to Singapore would marvel at what an incredible place Singapore is. And they don't really have high taxes, but what they have is high user fees. So for healthcare, you're forced to save 10% of your salary in a health account. Right? No question. That's just the rule.
Well, it's insurance.
Right? And it's insurance. So and then if you exhaust that, then the state kicks in. Okay. For the roads, when you drive along the roads are fantastic, but every car has a fee, a toll booth thing in the car, where you attach it to your car, and if you want to drive on one of the busier roads or popular roads, a transponder, that's the right word, right? A transponder, it deducts the money automatically from your transponder. You pay for what you use. So you pay for, if you don't want to go on the busy high road, you just stay off that road. Yeah. You go on the least road, but when you drive on the road, you're required to pay for it. So they have a heavy user fee model.
Can you imagine
but you have
if that
to
happen, yeah?
Yeah, no,
say we can put a toll for the road.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. So if you want to drive on Bay Street, you pay $3. If you want to drive on the side street, you want to go on a busy road. The busier the road, the more high traffic, the more expensive it is. And again, those are just examples. But wherever you go in the world, and I invite this as Bahamians go and travel, they see nice places. Google what they pay in taxes. Mm-hmm. Google what they pay in fees, and then when you ask of your government, listen, we do these things, then make that comparison, because that's the reality we have to face into.
Why don't we see that, though? I mean, look, you can pick up a book, or you can Google.
Yeah, you can Google.
You can go to say Barbados or Jamaica, and you can see they're paying income tax, they're paying property tax, They're paying
Poor. They pay all kind of taxes we never
VAT.
even consider. I mean, we never even think about.
And yet we pay basically VAT and duties. And most of us are property tax homes are under the property tax realm.
Right.
Why is it? Why don't we get that?
I think, remember now, the political culture here is that each side is always bandying somebody about too much tax. So we picked that up. That narrative has come into our popular, because any tax is too much tax. And so that's part of the reason. Again, I think the legitimate critique is that we in the public sector haven't done a good enough job in telling people where their money is being spent. Because even that's been politicized. So the fair critique is, listen, if we're going to pay, tell us where our money is going, show that they have some accountability. But that's only one half of the ledger. The second half of the ledger, I think we have to come to terms with if we want a better Bahamas, we're going to have to make the investment. As we saw this BPL debacle, I thought to myself, imagine if a government had come 10 years ago or 5 years ago and tell every Bahamian, listen, we will have a great humming, but we need you all, we're going to put a 10% surcharge on your electricity to do it. They'd scream bloody murder. Yeah. But if that 10% surcharge used properly, we would have had a brand new plant. So that's always the cry. We want it fixed. Like how people don't reduce the deficit, balance the budget, but don't raise the tax.
Right.
Well,
I'm afraid that if you get accountability and show them where the money is spent, which is what, I don't know the percentage that goes into salaries, they're not going to be happy with that because the service they get in exchange for that salary, which I'm sure you're not going to comment on, is another story. But listen, let's talk about this year's budget.
Right.
And more so the state of the economy. Now, there are a couple of things that stood out from last time.
Right.
One of the things that stood out to me was this thing about outstanding bills, and that how you could not manage the budget or manage your revenues because you didn't know where you were going to get a hit from.
Right.
I think both Peter Turnquist, who was on, said that he told people he would fire them if they presented him with another bill, that because he gave them ample chances to say, tell me what your bills are. Although, if they don't know where they're coming from, I guess they could explain, well, I didn't know it was coming either.
Yeah.
Where are we now with the outstanding bills?
Well, luckily that it has stopped going down to trickle. We still do get outstanding bills that somebody discovers. So we're not totally 100%, but it's been a sea change, in so much that we believe, I have to knock on wood when I say this, that we have a handle on all of the bills that are outstanding. And I give you an example why I have to say that, because in this year's budget, you will see that there is a $3 million set aside to pay the
just in case
BTC liability from the sale, the pension liability from the sale that happened in 2011. And that was something that just came to light during this fiscal year. So I only use that as an illustration that even last year we would still have major exposure that's just being uncovered. So that said, though, we would have this year so far probably paid off about $130 million in the old bills. We're going to pay off some more before the end of the month, so that's up till April. May and June figures aren't included.
Are you paying intergovernmental bills?
These were remember, we found a pot of $300 million of outstanding bills. We budgeted $170 million for it during this fiscal year, meaning the year that's going to end at the end of the week, and we would have paid about $130 million of that $170 as at the end of April. We have budgeted in the budget coming up, now the one that's in the House, to pay off another $100 million. So by the time we get to the end of next fiscal year, we would have hopefully settled somewhere between $250 and $270 million of the $300 million bill, because that was part of the reason that VAT had to go up to 12%, because we had to settle these bills that were left.
Well, do you have that? And again, that includes the intergovernmental bills, right?
Like that includes the bills that we owe to BC, to NIB, and that, and yeah.
So if what you're telling me is that this is 2020, this is 2019, 2020 budget, 2020, 2021 budget, 2021-22 budget, you would have settled that.
We would have settled most of it.
Does that revenue then go back to the bottom line?
So what that will do, that will give us the headroom that the government would have promised to start reducing the duties, all things going well, assuming that the economy continues to perform, etc. Right. All things being equal, then that should give us sufficient headroom to be able to make it on the government's commitment to reduce the duties. This year, we're reducing duties by about $28 million, meaning the year that starts July 1, mostly around furniture and household goods and the like. So there's still another $72 million or so.
Just to be devil's advocate, is it wise to reduce? Let's say you're managing it and everything's going okay.
Right.
Because once you reduce,
you can't put it back up.
You can't go back up. Wouldn't it be wiser to collect that money?
Right.
and to then, with accountability,
Right.
to spend it on things that you really are in dire need of doing, like schools. That.
Well, that you have that one.
You can take a break,
Right.
and we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here, along with Rogan Smith. Because I'm a senior citizen, I forgot where we were. We were talking about. There's a whole bunch of stuff we'll continue to talk about, but what I'm anxious to see is that the government of the Bahamas stabilizes our financial affairs to such an extent, and in doing so, during the process, okay, while myself and Ken and Rogan and others may understand it, that the average citizen can understand what is happening, because it's a very, very, I told you from the very first day you came, I thought it was, I went on a limb, I thought it was a very well put together budget last year.
Right.
It was painful.
Right.
But if you and I live in a house, okay, and one of those persons loses a job in that house, okay, and only $200 will be coming in instead of $400, we have to make a decision in that house what getting cut.
Right.
That's right.
Okay? Now, in this case, we said it was kind of reversed. We say, okay, look, we got to charge you some more money.
Right.
So you have to make some decisions on how you're going to spend that money. Because why? If you don't, we ain't gonna have no house.
Right. It again, it's an abstract argument to make. That's why it's so hard, because this is the reason.
But why is it abstract?
Because folks feel the pain today for benefit tomorrow. Folks want the benefit today. is the reason, we like working out. Working out is one of those things, and you work out is hard and it's but you just see the benefit tomorrow. They say hard work pay off tomorrow, but laziness pay off right now. So I think that what people
waking out is hard, man. No one wants to wake up.
That's my point. But they have tremendous benefits down the road, and it's that same thing. Listen, you're asking me to stop eating the cake today. I enjoy the cake today.
And you don't care if you lose the house tomorrow?
Yeah, but tomorrow I will deal with that. But that's why countries get into the trouble. Because the pressure on the citizens is, listen, why you keep talking about this pain? We ain't feeling the pain. So we let the good times roll until you buck up. Right? and then the citizen asks you, well, why didn't you take the tough calls back then and then listen to us making noise? So and of course people always assume that somebody else could pay this for me. Why are you talking to me? Why are you not going after X? Why are you not doing Y? Because collectively we don't have to pay, like you said.
Well, this is why if you're going to grade a government, and this is my own singular personal view, and anyone else subscribes to it, fine. If they don't, too bad. A government, I saw something way back about what leadership is all about, and what representative democracy is all about. It's not about just doing what the people say to do. It's about being put in a position to lead the people, which should happen, right? So if you are a leader and you have good, sound belief, and you could be wrong, by the way,
of course,
about how things should happen, then you got to do it at the risk of losing.
Yeah.
Because that's all the risk. That's the only risk.
Right.
That you have is actually losing the election. How big of a risk is that compared to losing the country?
Right. Well, that was the point the Prime Minister was attempting to make. And we see the examples. The challenging thing for me as the technocrat is we as Bahamians see what happens when countries take too long to adjust.
That's what we like last on the list.
Right,
we should know.
And so we've seen it in our peers, among our cousins. Most of us have family or friends in these countries which have been impacted in our own backyards. We've seen what happened when countries, again, ironically, but tellingly, is as this budget was being rolled out, Barbados was going through the same IMF adjustment that would have eventually happened to the Bahamas. Is the frog in the pot syndrome. If we waited too long, you get to a point where you have to make then VAT goes to 17%. Then you have to lay off 2,000 people. Then you got to impose taxes. And then folks will ask the government, well, guys, why didn't you raise it to 12% 6 years ago? Yeah. And let us catch there. So that is
But this is why I say it's not abstract, because when it's abstract? When it hasn't happened before and you don't have anything to do. If you live in a neighborhood, right? And 4 houses on the road, and 3 people get the house taken away because they was buying Mercedes, and you go and buy a Mercedes, okay, then you realize what's going to happen. So that's what I can't grasp.
And the other thing to be, looking at that side, I think one of the things that people were challenged with was that they had heard this VAT story before. Remember now, the VAT was originally proposed as something to reduce the deficit and debt and to take us to the road, and then of course that didn't happen. So I think the challenge for the government, and I work with the DPM every day, and his singular focus is that as a Ministry of Finance, we have to ensure that the government keeps its word, that the VAT tax, the increases, as painful as they are being used to lower the deficit. It is being used to pay off the old bills, and so even if people vex, they'll know that the government said that they're doing what it is that they said that they were going to do.
This may sound condescending, but when you were growing up, if your mother said brush your teeth,
right,
because you didn't want your teeth to rotten out,
right.
You could be vexed at her,
Right.
but you can brush your teeth,
right.
And then when you get older, you can realize, I'm glad they tell me to brush my teeth. Right. So let's talk about the state of the economy now.
Right.
So we've gone through this. I don't even think we could say we went through any kind of austerity.
Not at all.
We simply went through maybe tighter management.
Right. That's what we never do, austerity. I keep people using the term, and we really don't want to get to the point.
No.
Self-imposed or otherwise, right?
Yeah, we don't want to get into austerity. We really don't know what that feels like.
To the point where are we in terms of, I think the IDB made the statement, or the IMF, I don't know if it was IMF, said we turned the corner.
Right.
And as someone, I think who was on our show last week, say turn the corner don't mean, that don't mean when you turn the corner, they're a long road.
Right.
How long is that road?
If I had to estimate, I think we're going to hit our peak in probably another 18 to 24 months is when you're going to see the economy hit its peak. So we're still not at our peak yet, but we're certainly in a lot better position. And things are obviously aren't perfect, and there are different people feel in a different way. But employment is up. The visitor numbers are the best we've seen in some cases ever. The taxi drivers are doing work in the Family Islands. If those of you haven't been to the Family Islands in a while, go to someplace like Exuma or Abaco, and you really could feel the difference in some of those places. So we're in a good spot, barring the hurricanes, and barring that any the trade war doesn't, and the external forces. I think we'll hit that peak in about 2 years. That's when you see things like the port come on stream, when you see hopefully if the Hutchinson-Wamport deal gets finalized, the Alukaya deal gets finalized, I think that's where you're going to see us hit that peak, where we will really be in the high twos, low threes as far as the percentage of economic growth. And I then think, all things being equal, we haven't seen that in a while, so Bahamians aren't used to that kind of activity.
If knowing that we are so vulnerable to external forces, is it possible in a very, again, serious management, protocol, to actually have contingency for their external forces, or is this not possible?
No, it is. Actually, the IMF had recommended that we put 0.5% of our GDP every year into a contingency fund, because we know another hurricane is coming. Now, what that would mean is the government coming to go into Bahamas and say, listen, we want to put in place a special tax. Let's say 0.5% rider on the VAT or something equivalent.
Right.
Just to go into this particular fund. Again, you can imagine the political challenge around that, but that has always been recommended as the Bahamas. You are in a vulnerable zone where you are going to be hit with hurricanes, so it would be a smart thing to build it.
And if no hurricanes happen, you're just in a better position.
You're in a better position because you have
when it happens.
But this is again another reason why us being fiscally prudent is so important. We're not the U.S., so people see the U.S. running these major deficits. Well, the U.S. prints its own money for starters, and certainly they have a much bigger economy. If the U.S. gets hit with a hurricane, 1 county, 2 counties, 3 counties may be devastated, but all 700 other counties are in good shape. People could move. We're in a vulnerable spot, so we can't emulate what we see some of the big boys do. We don't have our own hard currency, and one hurricane hit New Providence, and that's game, set, match for us for a long time. So we have to build in resiliency, which means we have to be more fiscally prudent. What the government has decided to do is, again, get the $100 million standby loan facility to be able to mobilize funds quickly. They're making use of the dormant account, which is around $40 million, to create a fund to deal with that. And, of course, to make sure to see how we can improve our insurance coverage. So we're taking the insurance road pretty much to see, listen, we're going to set aside this $40, $50 million. We have some emergency loans we could get. And we are looking at something called catastrophic bonds, where you really just, it's playing Russian roulette with big time investors. You pay $5-6 million a year to them for a bond, and they will bet on it for 2 or 3 years. and if it hits within 2 or 3 years, they pay you $200 million. If not, they keep the money. So it's a kind. But I mean, these are people who deal with trillions of dollars. So
but you have to be, in an economy like ours where we have so little control over external forces. Not only hurricanes, like you say. Someone makes a snap decision to start a war in Iran.
Then
the oil supply dries up.
Right.
Then the surcharge shoots through the roof. The trade war happens. We import everything. How do we get caught up in that?
Right.
So now this year's budget. What would you say? We got 10 minutes left. Because it seems to me, to be quite frank, a low light. Budget.
Yeah, very much.
What would you say? But what would you say are the sort of cleanup things that you had to do this year that you did not do in last year's budget?
Well, like you say, this was.
I mentioned that you cheated me out of a little 2 years, but that's
right. No, this was really a state of course budget. As far as continuing to get our fiscal house in order. So the big thing that probably got a notice was that the fiscal target for this year was 1% of GDP as far as our deficit is concerned. So the deficit in 2016-17 was $660 million. That came down in 17-18 to 414. This year we're targeting $237 million, and we're pretty much on track.
What was the actual target?
$237 million.
237,
right? And we believe we're coming in at around 230. So we could be pretty much on target with that. And then next year in this budget is 117 million or something thereabouts. And again, that's to keep the deficit going down. So that's why you didn't see a lot of fireworks in the budget, because the notion is, listen, fiscal stability is what counts. And we also had to deal with the situation with the EU and revamping the entire tax structure. To the average person, there's really no impact. But for us, it was a tremendous amount of legal changes we had to do in changing the way that our business license is calculated, and the banking fees are done. That was a lot of heavy lifting. I want to thank the teams. It really was a come together moment for the Ministry of Finance, the financial services sector, the Securities Commission, the central bank. A lot of this Christmas was really tough on us. Us getting those stuff lined up and ready so that we can do what we can.
But is that bar still moving though?
No, well,
I saw a statement in the thing that we've in full compliance,
right? But of course that's today. When they meet again tomorrow, it may move. What we have said to the financial services sector, and again the government has said this, is listen, the world changed. We have to understand that what opportunities exist for us. We still 25 minutes from Miami. We're still on the Eastern Time Sea Zone. We're still a safe, secure place. I think our challenge is getting clients to come live here and operate from the Bahamas. Is the kinds of things that we have to.
Well, that's why I wanted to skip into ease of doing business.
Right.
So now that you've gotten, in your estimation, stabilization.
Right.
So we could, you're not just running away from from the situation as opposed to turning around and facing it ahead.
Right.
Why does it seems to me, and I think Ms. Hollowesco made a comment that she saw a lot of things weren't implemented. How hard is it to really get some of these? If it's I don't know what on the list, but let's say it's 100 things on the list that you need to do.
Right.
How hard is it to get Tatey off? Or the easiest Tatey anyway.
Yeah, one of the things, I've been back in government now almost 2 years ago, and I wish I could answer that question. It is. The bureaucratic inertia is something to behold, because we will find any reason why the smallest thing can't happen. That said, though, there's been some substantive move around things. The big that came from that committee was around land. How do you deal with land? And we've adopted most of their recommendations around land transactions. So most of them have been done. The more needling things is really how we make it easy for someone to get in business. Getting business license, we've done some substantial changes for that. That went from 3 or 4 weeks to 48 hours turnaround for that. Opening a new business is still a bit of a hassle, but we've even streamlined that. So we have some, and then those are legislative changes that we have to factor in. So I think we are going to get a big spot here. The other biggie that we are looking at this year is revenue collection. We haven't had a chance to talk about that, but there's still a lot of revenue that goes uncollected.
But that's not the ease of doing business. I mean, that's your fiscal management, right?
What we focus on.
Yeah.
But I feel as though we've tackled the the tough nuts on the ease of doing business. The other stuff is really procedural and stuff, so that when you sit down and you decide you want to get in business. Right? I'll give you a simple one. We have to tell people right now you need to go get the lawyers have to do it. They have to do the hot seal wax and stamp it and all those things. Yep. So we have to convince them, guys, listen.
We don't need to do ribbon on the thing no more.
But the thing with the red line, how to go. If you don't have a red line in the document and press stamp,
ribbon thing,
so it's some of those things that die hard.
I want to bring into another example, but I hear, like, for instance, to get money repatriated, right? You've gone through a whole legal process of getting the transaction closed.
Right.
And then the central bank tells you, well, we need to see the title thing from the 1800s.
Right.
Well, it's already happened. No one's questioning it. It's already done legally. Why are they involved in title clearance?
But see, and that's, again, it brings you to another point. We need to automate the land registry. So the Registrar General Department is doing some work. The PM's office we got to digitize the land registry. So I want us, we can come back and do another show, but we got to talk about how we recast government to make those kinds of things seamless, because that's a big part of the problem too.
Now, talking about recast, and this is a big one, and we only got like 3 or 4 minutes left. I want to talk about something that doesn't get a lot of talk, and that's the NEC.
Right.
The average Bahamian is not aware of this entity because they don't have to go through it.
Right.
And when the WTO report came out, the one thing they said that they could not find anywhere else in this hemisphere was an NEC. This is the National Economic Council.
Right.
Where when someone, let's say, so the example would be Marlon has a big yard.
Right.
He lives in a neighborhood. He wants to put a water park in that neighborhood. Now, the reality is you have zoning.
Right.
You have building permits. You have environmental impact studies.
Right.
Let's just use those 3.
Right.
Those 3 things should be kind of policy, right?
Right.
So either your residential zoning.
Right.
That you would have to apply to rezone, and you'd have to get the neighbors to thing.
Right.
You have an environmental impact study, and you have building permits.
Right.
Why do I have to go to another entity to ask even if I could bill it
in the first place? Right.
In the first place.
Right. Again, remember, we were not too long ago, you had to go to a shop licensing board to get permission to open a shop. So these are just relics that we really have to move past if we can free up the economy. Because you're right, it should be rules-based, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And not people-based. Because I tick up all the boxes, I meet all the criteria, I open my business.
If I want to open up a restaurant in Florida,
right.
I go.
Yeah.
I go get FPL.
Yeah.
I don't go to the mayor.
Yeah, exactly.
I go to the mall and I find out if I can put a restaurant in that mall.
Right.
And they say, no, we don't do restaurants. You can only have a clothes shop.
Right.
And then I go, but I can't do it there.
Right.
I don't have to go to a board to say, well, get lawyers.
Yeah,
so is that do you think that's a possible thing to break down, or
Yeah, that's a question at the policy level. I think that what is forcing that is the recognition that if we won't be competitive as a country,
that ain't gonna work.
It ain't gonna work, because people will not, who have monies that can move around, and including Bahamians, will not put up with that hassle when they can go to somewhere else, which is truly opening up the red carpet. If you as a Bahamians don't aware of this, if you want to open up a clothes store in Jamaica, you only got to go and open up a bank account and open the clothes store.
That's it.
All you have to do is what?
Just go to the bank, open your bank account, go get your license, and you can open a clothes store. We have Bahamians who own restaurants in Jamaica. And
that simple of a process?
In most places of the world, there's open investment policy. In Belize, where I was, there was Bahamians who came over and the partners in a bar.
Because the owner has nothing to do with the economy
exactly.
To the extent that the owner is creating opportunity.
Right. So
because Bahamians will work in that restaurant. They can't just say, we're going to bring in the Jamaican. You can't go to Jamaica and bring in Bahamians to work it.
No, you got to hire Jamaicans. You're going to pay taxes in Jamaica. You're going to create employment. So again, we're still in an anomaly in that sense where. And we're still fighting to keep that. I think that's the ultimate irony there. And the world has moved past that whole thing.
You can go to the United States right now. I don't know what the bottom line investment is.
Right.
And say, I want to open up a shop, a restaurant.
No, you can open a kiosk in Bayside. I had friends, we were looking at opening up a kiosk in Bayside. As a Bahamian.
Just apply for the license.
Yeah, just apply for the license. So, and you could do that in Jamaica or Barbados or Belize or most countries of the world now.
But it's not a lengthy process for that.
No, it's like any other Bahamian in Belize. You just have to, once you establish that you're there, you're a person in good legal standing, you're not a crooked, blah, blah, blah.
We have done it here, Rogan. For instance, the Travis Rest where we had dinner that night? Mm-hmm. We have actually a policy that allows you to open up a specialty restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I don't know if you still have to go through NEC.
Yeah, I think it's a little.
But the reality is, it's fairly automatic because as long as you say it's a specialty restaurant,
Right.
then you just go through the process.
Right.
So we got a long way to go,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
got to come back for some more shows so we can
Yeah.
because this is now that we've stabilized Marlon.
Right.
I think the big issue is how do we open it up?
How do we get the point to take off? And how do we talk to Bahamians in a different sort of way against a lot of the sort of politicized talk? I think we need to have more talk about conceptually. Is what we've been told really where we want to be going? I
Well,
think
we've
that's
been
something
told a big, like I got to go, Ken, but I know you talked this thing about how someone wanted to open up a motorcycle factory design shop here.
Right.
Well, the reality is we have no more motorcycle. We don't have any motorcycle designers.
Right.
But a Bahamian who's in school in the States
Right.
now would have an opportunity
Right.
to come and work in that motorcycle design school thing here.
Right.
But we can't because we don't have one.
Right.
And we don't want to let anyone in to do it. All right, lots to talk about. I want to thank you, Marlon, for coming.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Always good to come.
Less hoopla than last year. Hopefully
Right.
you keep it that way.
All right, we'll keep going. All right, thank you. All
Take
right,
care,
thank
man.
you. All right,
Thank you.